A young woman's life, full of promise, ends with a single gunshot to the face. Her father says it was suicide, but investigators quickly uncover disturbing truths. Truths that will shatter a family and shake an entire community. This is the story of Kailee Jo McMullen and the father who tried to silence her forever. It's summer in Norman, Oklahoma. The air is heavy with heat, and 22-year-old Kailee Jo McMullen is building a life she's proud of. She's bright, beautiful, and outgoing, the kind of young woman whose smile seems to light up a room. Friends describe her as loyal to a fault, fiercely protective of those she loves, and unwilling to let anyone feel alone. But beneath the warmth, Kailee carries scars that no one can see. Close friends know she's been through emotional storms before, and they've heard the whispers about trouble at home. Yet Kailee never lets those shadows dim her light. She's a former cheerleader, a young woman who still talks about dreams of the future, about love, about a life beyond Oklahoma. On the night of June 29, 2017, those dreams will end, not because of an accident and not because she gave up, but because of something far darker. Just before 10:30 a.m., Norman police receive a frantic 911 call. On the other end is Ronald Lee McMullen Jr., Kailee's father. His voice is shaky as he tells dispatchers his daughter has shot herself in the face. The urgency in his tone is laced with something else, something almost offensive. While emergency responders race to the scene, Ronald calls Kailee's mother. He tells her she needs to come quickly. She arrives minutes later, finding her daughter lying motionless. In shock, she begins CPR, desperate to save her child. But it's already too late. Kailee is pronounced dead at the scene. Ronald tells police that Kailee had been upset and that she'd taken her own life. It's the story he repeats, to officers, to friends, to anyone who will listen. But almost immediately, small inconsistencies begin to surface. Officers notice Ronald's behavior, erratic, jittery. They see him trying to wipe blood off his arms and shirt. When they stop him, he becomes defensive. Why would a grieving father be so worried about cleaning himself up? And then there's the matter of the gun. The .357 revolver that fired the fatal shot isn't where it should be. Neither is Kailee's body. Both have been moved. Crime scene investigators are trained to look for patterns and for things that don't fit. In Kailee's case, there are many. The gunshot wound tells a story. The shot came from about 18 inches away, far enough that Kailee couldn't have pulled the trigger herself without an awkward, improbable angle. Suicide wounds typically occur at point-blank range. This wasn't one of them. There's also gunshot residue testing. On Ronald's hands, the particles are significant. On Kailee's, not enough to match the father's version of events. As investigators dig deeper, a disturbing picture begins to emerge. Friends tell police that Kailee had confided in them before about being afraid of her father, about arguments that escalated into violence. One friend recalls Kailee saying Ronald had slapped her during a fight. Another reveals that Kailee had told her she'd been molested by him when she was younger. These are more than rumors. They are cries for help that had gone unanswered for years. By now, the idea of suicide no longer makes sense to police. Too many details contradict it. The wound distance, the gunshot residue, the moved evidence, the history of abuse. The home where Kailee died becomes a crime scene in every sense of the word. Evidence is bagged and tagged. Witnesses are interviewed. And slowly, the story Ronald McMullen is telling begins to crumble. But there's still one more piece investigators need. Something concrete that can tie Ronald directly to Kailee's death. 6 days after Kailee's death, Norman police make their move. On July 5, 2017, they arrest Ronald Lee McMullen Jr. on suspicion of first-degree murder. For Kailee's mother, the arrest is bittersweet. She's lost her daughter in the most violent way imaginable. And now, the man accused of killing her is someone she once loved. For investigators, this is only the beginning. A trial lies ahead, one that will expose the McMullen family's darkest secrets to the public. Kailee Jo McMullen's story is no longer about a tragic suicide. It's about abuse, control, and a desperate attempt to hide the truth. But as the world will soon learn, the truth has a way of forcing itself into the light, no matter how hard someone tries to bury it. Kailee's death shook her community to its core, but this is only the beginning of her story. As we continue this video, We'll take you inside the investigation that pulled apart Ronald McMullen's alibi piece by piece. If you believe every victim deserves their voice to be heard, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video so more people can learn what really happened to Kailee Jo McMullen. The moment Ronald McMullen was taken into custody, the case shifted from suspicion to proof. Now, investigators needed to turn a tangle of unsettling clues into a clear-picture murder, and they only had one chance to get it right. The house where Kailee died is silent now. Police tape flutters in the humid Oklahoma air, marking the boundary between everyday life and the grim work of homicide detectives. Inside, the walls still echo with the chaos of that morning. Hurried footsteps, desperate CPR, Ronald's frantic calls. But the investigators don't see chaos. They see evidence. Every stain, every misplaced object tells a story. And that story, they suspect, is not one of suicide. Forensic teams photograph everything. The position of the furniture, the patterns of blood spatter, the location of the revolver. Nothing is touched until it's been documented. Because in court, this evidence will have to speak louder than the man who claims his daughter took her own life. The revolver is a powerful weapon, a .357 Magnum. Kailee's wound is devastating, instantly fatal. But when the ballistics team examines the wound and compares it to test shots, the distance becomes clear. The shot was fired from roughly 18 inches away. It's a small but critical detail. In suicide cases, especially with handguns, the muzzle is almost always pressed against the skin or held just a few inches away. An 18-inch gap means Kailee's arms would have had to be unnaturally extended, an unlikely position for someone shooting themselves in the face. Then there's the trajectory. The bullet's path suggests an angle inconsistent with a self-inflicted shot. It's subtle, but to trained eyes, it screams foul play. Next, investigators turn to the gunshot residue, GSR, tests. They swab Kailee's hands and Ronald's. When the lab results come back, the contrast is striking. Ronald's hands are heavily positive for residue, consistent with someone who has recently fired a gun. Kailee's hands? Barely any. Not enough to suggest she'd pulled the trigger herself. For the detectives, this is no longer a maybe. It's evidence that Kailee did not and could not have killed herself. Investigators also scrutinize Ronald's actions in the moments after Kailee's death. Officers at the scene recall him trying to wipe blood off his body, despite being told not to disturb potential evidence. They remember his defensiveness, his refusal to answer some questions directly. It's not just what he did, it's what he didn't do. He didn't cradle his daughter. He didn't beg paramedics to save her. His focus seemed to be on controlling the narrative, making sure everyone heard his version first. With physical evidence pointing toward homicide, detectives begin digging into Ronald and Kailee's history. That's when friends start coming forward. One friend recalls a heated argument between Kailee and Ronald, ending with him slapping her across the face. Another friend reveals something even darker, that Kailee had confided in her about being molested by her father years earlier. These aren't isolated comments. Multiple people say Kailee had spoken about being afraid of her father, about not trusting him, about wanting to get away. The allegations are chilling. They also provide a possible motive, one that prosecutors will later seize upon. Family interviews reveal a complicated and strained relationship. While some relatives defend Ronald, others express doubt. Kailee's mother, devastated by the loss, begins to realize that the man she once married may have been capable of the unthinkable. Investigators tread carefully. Family dynamics are messy and emotions run high. But every conversation adds another piece to the puzzle, and that puzzle is starting to look like premeditated murder. With the evidence in hand, detectives run through possible scenarios. In one, Ronald confronts Kailee during an argument. The situation escalates, and he shoots her in a fit of rage. In another, Kailee threatens to expose his past abuse, and Ronald acts to silence her. Both scenarios point to the same conclusion. This was not suicide. This was an execution, staged to look like one. The repositioning of Kailee's body and the firearm only reinforces a theory. Someone wanted to create the illusion of a self-inflicted wound, and that someone was the only other person in the house. 6 days after the shooting, the evidence is enough for prosecutors to move forward. On July 5th, 2017, officers arrive at Ronald's location with an arrest warrant. The arrest is tense. Ronald insists on his innocence, repeating the suicide story. But this time, no one is buying it. He's booked into Cleveland County Jail on a charge of first-degree murder. The investigation doesn't end with the arrest. Detectives know that securing a conviction will require airtight evidence. They continue interviewing witnesses, gathering forensic reports, and building a timeline that eliminates any possibility of suicide. Prosecutors begin shaping the narrative they'll present to the jury: a father with a history of abuse, a daughter ready to break free, and a violent act to keep her silent forever. By the time the investigation phase ends, the case against Ronald McMullen is strong. But in the courtroom, strength isn't enough. The defense will fight tooth and nail to sow doubt. And in a trial where the accused is a grieving father, doubt can be a powerful weapon. The evidence paints a chilling picture. But will it be enough to convince a jury? As we continue, we'll dive into the motive prosecutors believe drove Ronald McMullen to murder his own daughter. If you want to see justice for Kailee, make sure you're subscribed and share her story so the truth can't be buried again. Evidence can tell us what happened, but to convince a jury, prosecutors need to show why it happened. And in Kailee Jo McMullen's case, the answer is buried in years of fear, control, and secrets. From the outside, Kailee's life seemed picture-perfect. She was a smiling young woman in photographs, the girl cheering on the sidelines, the friend who always picked up the phone. But to those who truly knew her, there was a shadow in the background, a shadow shaped like her father. In quiet moments with close friends, Kailee would reveal pieces of the truth. There were stories of verbal abuse, angry outbursts, and, most disturbingly, sexual abuse that had begun when she was young. She never told police, fearing the fallout. Instead, she carried that weight alone, holding on to the hope that one day she'd leave for good. As Kailee entered her 20s, she began to find her voice. Friends noticed a shift. She was spending less time at home, making plans for a life on her own. She talked about pursuing work in another city, maybe even another state. She was tired of the fear, the manipulation, the constant tension with her father. But leaving wasn't simple. Ronald controlled much of Kailee's life, where she lived, her transportation, even her finances. Breaking away meant confrontation, and confrontation meant danger. According to friends, Kailee hinted she might finally tell the world about the abuse. She was no longer a child. She was a grown woman with the power to speak, and that made her a threat to the man who controlled her for so long. By late June 2017, Ronald's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. Witnesses later described him as paranoid and agitated. He would talk about people turning against him and complain that Kailee was being disrespectful. In his mind, the shift in their relationship wasn't independence. It was betrayal. For a man with a history of violence and control, the idea that Kailee might expose him was more than just a problem. It was an existential threat. His entire image, his freedom, his sense of dominance, all of it could come crashing down if she spoke. The events of June 29th, 2017, remain partially a mystery, but the evidence suggests a heated confrontation that morning. Perhaps Kailee told Ronald she was leaving. Perhaps she confronted him about the past, or warned him she would tell others. What is known is this: within hours, Kailee was dead from a gunshot wound to the face, fired from a distance that made suicide nearly impossible. To prosecutors, the timeline spoke volumes. The fight, the shot, the hurried cleanup, the staged suicide narrative, it all pointed to an act of desperation, not despair. During the investigation, law enforcement compiled a disturbing portrait of Ronald McMullen's treatment of his daughter over the years. It wasn't just physical violence. It was emotional domination, controlling her choices, isolating her from certain friends, and making her dependent on him. Friends reported hearing Ronald insult Kailee, calling her names, belittling her ambitions. One recalled seeing him grip her arms so tightly she winced. Another described Kailee breaking down in tears after a fight, saying she felt trapped. This pattern is critical to understanding the motive. In abusive dynamics, the abuser's greatest fear is losing control. And when the victim gains independence or threatens to reveal the abuse, that fear can turn lethal. In their case file, prosecutors outlined a clear theory. Kailee planned to leave and possibly disclose the years of abuse. Ronald feared exposure and loss of control. In a moment of rage, or perhaps cold calculation, he shot her, then staged the scene to look like suicide. The theory fit the evidence. The wound distance, the lack of residue on Kailee's hands, the move gun, Ronald's blood cleanup attempt. But more than that, it fit the human psychology at play. A man whose identity depended on dominance, faced with the one person who could destroy it. Ronald's attorneys, however, saw things differently. They claimed Kailee had been struggling emotionally and that her death was indeed a suicide. They dismissed the abuse allegations as hearsay and suggested the gunshot residue results were inconclusive. They knew the motive was the prosecution's strongest card, and they worked hard to undermine it. Without a clear motive, they argued, the jury might see the case as a tragedy rather than crime. For Kailee's mother and friends, hearing the defense's arguments was agonizing. They knew the truth of Kailee's life, the fear she had carried, the courage she had been building, and they knew she had never once expressed a desire to end her own life. To them, the motive was obvious, but proving to 12 strangers in a jury box would be another challenge entirely. By the time jury selection approached, the motive was more than a theory. It was a story woven from years of whispered confessions, visible bruises, and the final, irreversible act of violence. But as strong as the case looked on paper, the trial ahead would test every piece of it. A motive can reveal the heart of crime, but in court, it must survive attack from every angle. In the next chapter, we'll walk you through the high-stakes trial where both sides fought to control Kailee's story. Make sure you're subscribed, hit the notification bell, and share this video so Kailee's voice continues to be heard, even when she cannot speak for herself. When the courtroom doors swing open, the fight for justice begins in earnest. For the prosecution, this trial is about truth. For the defense, it's about doubt. And for the jury, it's about deciding whether a grieving father is also a cold-blooded killer. It's April 2019 in the Cleveland County Courthouse. Nearly 2 years have passed since Kailee Jo McMullen was killed. The delay has done little to dull the grief of her friends and family, or the tension in the air. In the gallery, Kailee's loved ones sit in somber rows, clutching tissues, wearing pins with her photo. On the other side, Ronald sits at the defense table, wearing a suit instead of a jail uniform. His expression is calm, almost attached, as if the outcome here is just another conversation to be had. 12 jurors take their seats. They will decide his fate. Prosecutor Christy Miller steps forward. Her voice is firm, deliberate. She tells the jury this is not a suicide case. This is a murder, a stage scene meant to protect the killer. She walks them through the forensic evidence. The 18-inch firing distance, inconsistent with suicide, the lack of gunshot residue on Kailee's hands, the positive GSR on Ronald's hands, the suspicious cleanup of blood from his own skin. Then she touches on the motive, years of abuse and control, and Kailee's growing independence. She promises the jury that witnesses will paint a picture of a young woman ready to break free, and a father who couldn't let that happen. When the defense's turn comes, Attorney Garvin Isaac speaks softly, almost sympathetically. He tells the jury that Ronald loved his daughter deeply, that he is devastated by her loss. He warns them not to be swayed by speculation or emotion. The defense claims the evidence is being twisted, that GSR can be transferred, that the firing distance doesn't eliminate suicide, and that Kailee had her own struggles that no one fully understood. Their job is clear: plant seeds of doubt. The trial's emotional core comes from the people who knew Kailee best. A close friend testifies that Kailee confided about her father's inappropriate behavior when she was younger. The courtroom falls silent as she describes Kailee's fear. Another friend recalls the heated arguments, the times Kailee would crash at her place just to get away. A former boyfriend describes Kailee's plans to leave home permanently, and how excited she was about a future without her father's influence. Each testimony feels like a brick in the wall prosecutors are building, a wall meant to corner Ronald with the truth. Then come the experts that a ballistic specialist confirms the shot distance and trajectory, explaining in layman's terms why it doesn't match typical suicides. The crime scene investigator describes the placement of the gun and the blood patterns, how they indicated the scene had been altered A GSR expert breaks down the science. Kaylee's low levels were inconsistent with her firing the weapon. Ronald's levels, however, told a different story. The jurors take notes. Some lean forward. Others glance at Ronald. When the defense calls their own witnesses, the tone shifts. They present character witnesses who describe Ronald as a loving father, someone incapable of killing his child. They challenge the reliability of GSR testing, pointing out contamination risks. They also attempt to undermine the abuse allegations, arguing there's no physical evidence, only memories and hearsay. They stress that Kaylee's death was a tragedy, but not a crime. Prosecutor Miller pushes back hard. On cross-examination, she forces defense witnesses to admit they weren't present that morning, that they didn't know every detail of Ronald and Kaylee's private life. When Ronald's supporters claim he wouldn't harm her, Miller reminds them and the jury that abusers often hide in plain sight. Each day of trial grinds on. Kaylee's mother breaks down during testimony, leaving the courtroom in tears. Some jurors look shaken by the abuse accounts. Others keep their expressions unreadable. Outside, reporters wait to capture every update. The public is split. Some see Ronald as a murderer, others as a grieving father under attack. After 2 weeks of testimony, the lawyers make their final appeals. Miller stands before the jury, her voice steady but intense. Kailee Jo McMullen did not take her own life. The evidence shows she was shot from a distance. The evidence shows her hands were clean. The evidence shows the man who should have protected her is the one who ended her life. The defense's closing is softer but calculated. There is no video, no eyewitness, only assumptions and theories. Don't let sympathy cloud your judgment. If there is reasonable doubt, you must acquit. The jurors file out to deliberate. The room they leave behind feels heavier than before. On one side, Kaylee's family grips hands. On the other, Ronald stares straight ahead, betraying nothing. Hours tick by. Everyone waits. By the time the jury returns, the weight of the trial has etched itself onto their faces. They are about to speak the truth as they see it. And whatever they say will change lives forever. The evidence is in. The arguments are over. Now, 12 strangers hold the power to decide justice for Kailee Jo McMullen. In our final chapter, you'll hear the verdict and what it meant for everyone involved. Don't miss it. Subscribe, share, and keep Kaylee's story alive. 2 years after a young woman's life was cut short, and 2 weeks after her story unfolded in court, the moment of truth has arrived. For the jury, it's the end of deliberations. For everyone else, it's the moment they've been waiting and dreading to hear. The courtroom is silent as the bailiff announces that the jury has reached a verdict. The 12 men and women file in, each carrying the invisible weight of what they've decided. Kaylee's mother clutches a small framed photo of her daughter. Ronald sits motionless at the defense table, eyes fixed on the foreperson. The judge asks the question, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." The paper is handed over. The judge reads aloud. "We, the jury, find defendant Ronald D. McMullen guilty of first-degree murder." A gasp ripples through the gallery. Kaylee's family collapses into each other's arms, sobbing openly. Some friends cry quietly. Others whisper justice through their tears. On the other side, Ronald's relatives react in disbelief. One shakes their head, whispering under their breath. Ronald himself does not flinch. He simply stares straight ahead, jaw tight, as if he's refusing to let the verdict break him. The judge wastes little time. Given the conviction, the law mandates a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The words are final. For Kaylee's family, they bring a measure of closure, but not the peace of having her back. Before the sentence is carried out, the court invites victim impact statements. Kaylee's mother steps forward. Her voice cracks as she speaks. "You were supposed to protect her. Instead, you took her from us. Every birthday, every holiday, every ordinary day, there will always be a missing piece." Her words hang in the air like a physical weight. When given a chance to speak, Ronald maintains his innocence. He calls Kaylee's death a tragedy, but insists he did not cause it. His statement is short, emotionless, almost rehearsed. For the family, His lack of remorse confirms what they felt all along, that he will never admit the truth. News crews swarm the steps outside. Prosecutor Christy Miller addresses the media, commending the jury for seeing through the stage scene and believing the forensic evidence. This verdict says Kaylee's life mattered, she tells reporters, and that no one, not even a parent, is above the law. For Kaylee's friends, speaking to the press is bittersweet. They talk about her laughter, her kindness, her dreams. They want people to remember her as more than a victim. The case sends shockwaves through the community. Some are horrified that a father could kill his own daughter. Others are struck by how long Kaylee's suffering went unnoticed by outsiders. Advocates for domestic violence victims use the case as a rallying point, reminding the public that abuse can happen anywhere and that listening to victims could save lives. For those closest to her, the trial's end is not the end of grief. Kaylee's mother keeps her bedroom much the same as it was. The same posters on the walls, the same perfume on the dresser. Friends admit that even years later, they sometimes reach for their phones to text her before remembering she's gone. The verdict brings accountability, but not healing. That, they know, will take much longer. In prison, Ronald begins his life sentence. Officials describe him as a quiet inmate, rarely speaking to others. Whether he reflects on his crime is unknown. But for the family, his personal reckoning is far less important than the fact that he can never hurt anyone again. In the years following the trial, Kaylee's loved ones established a scholarship in her name for young women pursuing careers in social work and counseling. They say it's what she would have wanted, to help others who feel trapped or voiceless. Each year on the anniversary of her death, they gather to release lanterns into the night sky. For them, it's both a memorial and a promise that her light will never truly go out. This case is more than a crime story. It's a reminder that abuse can hide in plain sight, that the most dangerous place for some victims is their own home. Kaylee's story calls on us to listen, to act, and to never dismiss someone's fear as exaggeration. Her death was preventable. Her voice, silence in life, now speaks through the verdict, and through the people who refuse to let her be forgotten. Justice was served in the courtroom, but Kaylee's fight lives on in every victim who needs to be heard. Share her story. Speak up when you see the warning signs, and support those who are trapped in silence. For more stories like this, subscribe and join us in keeping these voices alive, because telling the truth is the first step towards stopping the next tragedy. Thank you so much for watching and supporting this story. Your time, your attention, and your kindness mean the world to me. Together, we keep these important stories alive, honoring the memories of those lost and shining a light on the truth. If you found this story meaningful, please like, share, and subscribe so we can continue bringing you real stories that matter. Your support helps build a community that cares deeply and never forgets. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for being here. Until next time, take care and stay safe.